Mike Tyson, knocking out grown men in under 90 seconds and terrifying an entire sport. In 1986, at just 20 years old, Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. He was worth tens of millions, unbeaten, unstoppable, and labeled the most dangerous man on the planet. But how many people know that behind those knockouts was a boy who grew up in fear, violence, and constant humiliation? Right after those knockouts, the cameras followed Mike Tyson into the locker room. No roar. No celebration. Just silence. While the arena was still shaking, Tyson sat alone, staring at the floor, his hands still wrapped, his chest rising like he had just survived a war. Outside, thousands screamed his name. Inside, there was nothing but tension, paranoia, and a kind of fear that never left him. By 21, Tyson owned mansions, luxury cars, and private jets. By 22, he was making more money in a single night than most people would earn in a lifetime. Opponents admitted they were already defeated before the bell rang. Some barely lasted 30 seconds. Commentators called him a force of nature. Fans called him a god of destruction. But late at night, Tyson couldn't sleep without lights on. He trusted no one. He felt hunted, not admired. The same rage that ended fights instantly was eating him alive. Every punch carried something older than boxing, years of humiliation, beatings, and being powerless as a child. Fame didn't quiet those memories. Money didn't protect him from himself. In fact, the higher he climbed, the more violently he began to fall. The world saw a monster who couldn't be stopped. But what happens when a man built entirely on fear finally loses control of it? Mike Tyson was born in 1966, in Brownsville, Brooklyn, one of the most violent neighborhoods in New York at the time. It wasn't a place that raised children. It was a place that tested who would survive. Crime was normal. Fear was constant. And safety was something Tyson never knew growing up. His father was absent. His mother was exhausted, struggling to keep the family together while the streets slowly raised her son instead. As a child, Tyson was small, soft-spoken, and painfully vulnerable. He had a noticeable lisp. He avoided eye contact. Other kids sensed weakness immediately, and they attacked it without mercy. He was beaten, robbed, humiliated. His clothes were stolen. His dignity was taken. Sometimes the bullying turned physical. Other times, it was worse, laughter, mockery, and the message drilled into him daily that he didn't matter. Fear followed him everywhere. On the way to school. On the walk home. Even inside his own building. Tyson later admitted that as a boy, he lived in a constant state of panic, always waiting for the next hit, the next insult, the next moment he would be made to feel small again. He learned early that crying only made it worse. So he swallowed it. He buried it. At home, there was no refuge. Poverty pressed in from every direction. The apartment was cramped. The neighborhood was loud, chaotic, and unforgiving. Tyson spent hours alone, hiding in corners, trying to stay invisible. He began stealing and getting into trouble at a young age, not out of cruelty, but survival. Arrests came early. Reform school followed. Authority figures didn't see a child in pain. They saw a problem that needed to be controlled. Then something shifted. For the first time in his life, Tyson discovered a feeling more powerful than fear, anger. Not the loud kind. The quiet, boiling kind. The kind that stayed inside his chest long after the bruises faded. He realized that when he fought back, the bullying stopped. When he became violent, people backed away. Fear, he learned, worked both ways. That lesson changed everything. Violence became his armor. Rage became his shield. It was the only language the streets respected. And slowly, the scared boy disappeared behind a hardened exterior. But the fear never left. It simply went underground, fueling every punch, every outburst, every act of self-destruction that would come later. As a teenager, Tyson drifted further from school and deeper into trouble. His future looked painfully predictable: prison, addiction, or death. No one expected more from him. No one imagined greatness. Least of all him. By the time he was arrested again and sent to a juvenile detention center, Tyson believed what the world had been telling him since childhood, that he was destined to fail. And then, inside that locked facility, something unexpected happened. He met a man who didn't see a criminal, a bully, or a lost cause. He saw raw potential. A man who would soon give Tyson something he had never had before: structure, belief, and a purpose powerful enough to redirect all that fear and rage. But what kind of mentor takes a broken child and teaches him to turn fear into a weapon, and at what cost? Mike Tyson didn't walk into boxing. He was pulled into it by circumstance, discipline, and a man who would redefine his entire existence. Inside a juvenile detention center, where most futures quietly ended, Tyson met Cus D'Amato. An aging trainer with piercing eyes and an obsession with psychology, Cus didn't see a delinquent. He saw something dangerous, not because Tyson was violent, but because his fear was still raw, unprocessed, and powerful. Cus watched Tyson move. Watched him punch. Watched how anger poured out of him uncontrollably. And instead of trying to calm it, Cus did the unthinkable. He decided to shape it. For the first time, someone didn't tell Tyson to suppress his rage. He taught him how to aim it. Boxing wasn't just a sport. It became a system. A structure. A way to survive without going back to the streets. Cus took Tyson into his home. Fed him. Gave him rules. Gave him a routine that bordered on obsession. Wake up early. Train. Study film. Repeat. Tyson was told what to eat, when to sleep, how to think. And most importantly, what to believe. Cus filled his head with one message, over and over again: fear is not your enemy. Fear is your fuel. Training was brutal. Tyson ran for miles before sunrise. Hours of sparring followed. Endless repetition of head movement, footwork, explosive combinations. Cus drilled into him the peekaboo style, designed to turn a smaller fighter into a devastating force. Tyson was barely a teenager, fighting grown men in the gym, absorbing punishment, learning to give it back harder. Pain became normal. Exhaustion became irrelevant. But the real training happened outside the ring. Cus spoke to Tyson constantly about destiny. About greatness. About becoming champion. He told him, "You're not normal. You're special." Those words mattered more than any punch. For a boy who had grown up unwanted, dismissed, and disposable, belief was intoxicating. Tyson didn't just want to succeed. He needed to prove he was worth saving. Still, the early days were not glamorous. Tyson fought in small amateur bouts. Dingy gyms. Empty bleachers. No cameras. No applause. He was often underestimated because of his size, his background, his age. Some trainers thought he was too wild, too emotional, too unstable. Others said he would burn out before ever reaching the top. Tyson heard all of it. And every doubt added more fuel to the fire Cus was building inside him. There were moments when Tyson wanted to quit. Training was isolating. He had no normal teenage life. No friends. No escape. Boxing became his entire identity. Cus encouraged that dependency. He didn't want Tyson distracted. He wanted him obsessed. Focused. Controlled. And Tyson complied, because the alternative, being alone with his fear, was worse. As his amateur record grew, so did the intensity. Tyson began knocking opponents out with frightening ease. Some fights ended in seconds. People started whispering. There was something different about this kid. Something terrifying. Cus pushed him harder. More discipline. More mental conditioning. Tyson was told repeatedly that he was destined for the heavyweight championship. That failure was not an option. That fear of losing must be crushed before it ever surfaced. But beneath the success, cracks were already forming. Tyson's confidence came from Cus, not from within. His sense of control depended entirely on structure. Remove that structure, and everything would collapse. At the time, no one wanted to acknowledge that risk. The results were too impressive. The rise was too fast. By the time Tyson turned professional, he was already fighting like a man possessed. He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to annihilate. Each opponent represented every bully, every humiliation, every night he spent scared and powerless. Boxing gave him permission to unleash what he had buried since childhood. And the world rewarded him for it. Wins piled up. Knockouts became routine. Promoters took notice. The hype began quietly, then exploded. Tyson was no longer just a prospect. He was a weapon. A phenomenon. And Cus D'Amato watched proudly as his creation marched toward the destiny he had scripted years earlier. But behind closed doors, one truth remained unchanged. Tyson wasn't learning how to live. He was learning how to destroy. And the more successful he became, the more fragile his foundation grew. Because everything he was becoming depended on one man holding the leash on his fear. And when that man would eventually be gone, there would be nothing left to stop the storm. So what happens when a young fighter, built entirely on discipline, fear, and borrowed belief, suddenly tastes fame, and realizes the world is watching? By the time Mike Tyson entered the professional ranks, it didn't feel like the rise of a boxer. It felt like the arrival of a force. Fight after fight, opponents fell in the first round. Some didn't last a minute. Others barely had time to raise their guard. By 1985, Tyson was already knocking out seasoned professionals with a speed and violence the heavyweight division hadn't seen in decades. Commentators struggled to describe him. He was too fast for a heavyweight. Too explosive. Too aggressive. Tyson didn't box to outscore opponents. He hunted them. He stalked them from the opening bell, slipping punches, closing distance, and unloading combinations with terrifying precision. The crowd didn't cheer out of excitement alone. They cheered out of shock. Then came November 22, 1986. At 20 years old, Mike Tyson stepped into the ring against Trevor Berbick for the WBC heavyweight title. 2 knockdowns later, Berbick collapsed, trying to stand on legs that no longer worked. The referee waved it off. Tyson didn't celebrate. He simply walked away. History had been made. The youngest heavyweight champion of all time. The media exploded. Headlines crowned him Iron Mike. Magazine covers turned him into a myth. Promoters sold fear as entertainment. Fighters admitted they lost before the fight even began. Some watched tapes in silence, knowing there was no strategy to survive what was coming. Tyson unified the heavyweight division by 1987, collecting belts and destroying champions one by one. Money followed instantly. Mansions. Exotic cars. Private jets. Fame without limits. Tyson was earning millions per fight before his 22nd birthday. Cameras followed his every move. Fans screamed his name wherever he went. The world told him he was invincible. And for a while, he believed it. But the image the world saw was carefully constructed. The perfect villain. The unstoppable champion. Inside, Tyson lived under constant pressure. He was expected to be violent, dominant, ruthless, all the time. There was no room for vulnerability. No space for doubt. Any sign of weakness threatened the persona that made him valuable. Training camps grew chaotic. Discipline loosened. New voices replaced old ones. Cus D'Amato was gone, but no one dared say his name. Tyson began surrounding himself with people who said yes to everything. The structure that once held him together quietly disappeared. In its place came indulgence, excess, and ego. The signs were there. Missed training sessions. Late nights. Increasing paranoia. Tyson didn't trust anyone. He felt watched. Judged. Used. The fear that had fueled him as a child returned, now amplified by fame. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. Inside the ring, he was still destroying opponents. Outside the ring, he was unraveling. The world saw dominance. What it couldn't see was a young man losing the only system that ever kept him stable. Without structure, without guidance, Tyson began fighting not just opponents, but himself. And when the fear he had been taught to control finally slipped free, the collapse would be violent, public, and unforgettable. What happens when the most feared man on earth realizes he no longer fears anything, not even the consequences? When Cus D'Amato died in 1985, Mike Tyson didn't just lose a trainer. He lost the only man who could control the storm inside him. Cus had been more than a mentor. He was a father, a guardian, a psychological anchor. He set rules. He enforced discipline. He absorbed Tyson's fear and redirected it into purpose. When that presence vanished, nothing replaced it. At first, the wins continued. Knockouts still came quickly. The belt stayed around Tyson's waist. But something subtle had changed. There was no longer a voice telling him when to stop. No structure forcing him to sleep, to train, to focus. Tyson began to test his freedom the same way he tested opponents, aggressively, recklessly, without limits. Money flooded in faster than Tyson could process. By his early 20s, he had access to everything he had been denied as a child. Luxury cars. Mansions. Women. Power. People stopped saying no. They laughed at his jokes. They agreed with his decisions. They fed his ego while quietly draining his stability. Tyson later admitted that he didn't know who to trust, so he trusted no one, except his impulses. Training camps became chaotic. Discipline eroded. Workouts were skipped. Nights grew longer. Tyson chased distraction to silence the thoughts he didn't know how to face. The fear returned, not the fear of being beaten, but the fear of being exposed. The fear that without violence, without dominance, there was nothing left underneath. Inside his head, rage never rested. Tyson had been taught to weaponize fear, not understand it. He was never taught how to sit with pain, how to process abandonment, or how to regulate emotion. Boxing had been the outlet. Now fame magnified everything. Every insult felt personal. Every challenge felt like an attack. Every loss of control demanded retaliation. Then came February 11, 1990. Tokyo. A quiet challenger named Buster Douglas stepped into the ring as a 42-1 underdog. No one believed he could win. Tyson didn't believe he could lose. He trained poorly. He ignored warnings. He entered the ring assuming fear would do the work for him. It didn't. Douglas stood his ground. He absorbed punishment. He refused to be intimidated. And for the first time in Tyson's career, something unfamiliar happened: resistance. The fight dragged on. Tyson grew frustrated. His confidence cracked. By the 10th round, Tyson was exhausted, swollen, and disoriented. Douglas knocked him out cold. The most feared man in boxing lay on the canvas, searching for a mouthpiece that wasn't there. The loss shattered the myth. Overnight, Tyson went from invincible to vulnerable. The world reacted with shock, then ridicule. Critics emerged. Doubt replaced fear. Tyson didn't know how to handle it. He had never learned how to lose. He had only learned how to destroy. Instead of reflection, he doubled down. Angrier. More unstable. The loss didn't humble him, it exposed him. Lawsuits followed. Relationships collapsed. Legal troubles mounted. Tyson's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Violence spilled outside the ring. He felt hunted again, just like he had as a child. And then came the moment that permanently defined his public image. A moment when years of unhealed trauma, rage, and pressure exploded in front of the entire world. But before that act, before the headlines and outrage, Tyson was already spiraling. Fame had given him everything, except peace. And without peace, power only accelerates destruction. So what happens when the most dangerous man alive realizes fear no longer protects him, and rage is the only thing he has left? By the mid-1990s, Mike Tyson was no longer fighting opponents. He was fighting his own reflection. The belts were gone. The fear was gone. What remained was rage without direction. Every criticism felt like betrayal. Every challenge felt like humiliation. Tyson had built his entire identity on dominance, and now the world was watching that identity crack in real time. In 1992, the collapse turned irreversible. Tyson was convicted of rape and sentenced to 6 years in prison, serving 3. The headlines were brutal. The fall was absolute. From global icon to inmate. From private jets to prison cells. For the first time since childhood, Tyson was stripped of power, money, and control. And for the first time, there was nowhere left to run. Prison was not redemptive. It was confrontational. Silence replaced applause. Isolation replaced chaos. Tyson was forced to sit with himself, the fear, the anger, the shame. He later admitted that prison didn't break him. It exposed him. The violent persona that once protected him had no purpose behind bars. Without boxing, without fame, without an audience, Tyson didn't know who he was. When he was released in 1995, the world didn't welcome him back with empathy. It welcomed him with expectation. The comeback narrative was ready. Redemption through violence. Tyson leaned into it because it was the only script he knew. He returned to the ring stronger, angrier, desperate to reclaim the fear that once defined him. And then came Evander Holyfield. Their rematch in 1997 was supposed to be Tyson's restoration. Instead, it became his public unraveling. Frustrated, dominated, and mentally cornered, Tyson snapped. In front of millions watching live, he bit off a piece of Holyfield's ear. Not once. Twice. The fight was stopped. Tyson was disqualified. The crowd erupted in disbelief. That moment wasn't about boxing. It was about a man losing the last thread of control. Years of unprocessed trauma, entitlement, paranoia, and rage exploded in a single act. The image was seared into history. From that night forward, Mike Tyson wasn't just remembered as a fallen champion. He was labeled a monster. Suspensions followed. Money vanished again. Lawsuits piled up. Public trust evaporated. Tyson spiraled deeper into substance abuse, reckless spending, and emotional instability. By the early 2000s, he had earned over $300 million, and lost almost all of it. Bankruptcy wasn't a shock. It was the inevitable end of a life built on excess without foundation. What hurt most wasn't the loss of wealth or titles. It was the realization that fear had failed him. Violence no longer protected him. The persona he had been rewarded for becoming had consumed him completely. Tyson later said that he hated the version of himself the world loved, because that version had never been real. The truth was painful. Mike Tyson was never taught how to be human. He was taught how to intimidate, how to dominate, how to destroy. And when those tools stopped working, there was nothing left to hold him together. Rock bottom didn't arrive with a single event. It arrived quietly. Alone. Older. Forgotten. A man once feared by the world now forced to confront the damage he had caused, to others, and to himself. And yet, buried beneath the wreckage of his life, something unexpected remained. Awareness. The slow, uncomfortable understanding that rage was never strength, it was armor. And armor eventually rusts. So when everything is gone, the fear, the fame, the money, the violence, what kind of man is left standing? The real turning point in Mike Tyson's life didn't arrive with a championship belt or a sold-out arena. It arrived in silence. In moments when no one was watching. After the suspensions, the lawsuits, the bankruptcies, and the endless headlines, Tyson was forced to confront a truth he had spent his entire life running from. Violence had given him power, but it had never given him peace. For years, Tyson believed rage was his identity. Fear was his fuel. Dominance was his worth. Without them, he felt empty. But as the chaos slowly burned itself out, something unfamiliar crept in: reflection. Not the glamorous kind. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that asks questions instead of offering excuses. Tyson began to talk. Not to reporters, not to fans, but to himself. He started revisiting his childhood, not as a legend looking back, but as a damaged boy finally trying to understand why everything had gone wrong. He acknowledged the fear he never processed. The abandonment he never healed. The way violence had been rewarded so early that it became his only language. This was not a heroic transformation. There was no sudden clarity. No dramatic redemption arc. Growth came slowly, painfully, and often publicly. Tyson struggled with addiction. He relapsed. He embarrassed himself. He failed again. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time, he stopped pretending he was invincible. Tyson began therapy. He spoke openly about trauma, mental health, and emotional regulation, topics that would have once been unthinkable for the man the world knew as Iron Mike. He admitted that fame had amplified his wounds instead of healing them. That money had removed consequences instead of teaching responsibility. That the persona people feared was built to protect a terrified child who never learned how to feel safe. He also began dismantling his ego. Slowly, reluctantly. Tyson confessed that he hated the image the world celebrated, because it trapped him in a role he couldn't escape. He realized that as long as he was trying to live up to the monster, he would never become a man. Letting go of that identity felt like death, but it was necessary. Financial collapse forced humility. Bankruptcy stripped away illusions. Without excess, without entourage, without constant validation, Tyson learned to live smaller, quieter, more honestly. He took responsibility for his mistakes without justifying them through pain. He stopped blaming the world. He stopped blaming his past. Not because the past didn't matter, but because he finally understood that healing required accountability. Tyson also began to speak to younger generations. Not as a warning sign. Not as a success story. But as a living contradiction. He told them that talent without emotional discipline is dangerous. That power without self-awareness becomes self-destruction. That fear ignored does not disappear, it multiplies. In interviews, Tyson no longer glorified violence. He talked about regret, about the cost of never learning how to regulate emotion, about how being feared feels empty when no one truly knows you. These weren't rehearsed sound bites. They were confessions. Raw, uncomfortable, human. The rebirth wasn't about reclaiming greatness. It was about redefining it. Tyson stopped chasing admiration. He started chasing understanding. He accepted that some damage could never be undone. Some relationships could never be repaired. Some moments would follow him forever. And instead of fighting that reality, he learned to live with it. What made this transformation powerful wasn't perfection. It was honesty. Tyson didn't present himself as healed. He presented himself as healing. Still flawed. Still learning. Still vulnerable. The same man who once terrified an entire sport now spoke openly about fear, shame, and accountability, not to erase his past, but to make sense of it. In many ways, the rebirth came too late to save his legacy in the traditional sense. But it arrived just in time to save something more important: his humanity. Mike Tyson would never be remembered only as a champion again. But he would be remembered as something rarer, a man who survived his own mythology and lived long enough to understand the price of becoming what the world demands instead of who you truly are. And if awareness is the first step toward redemption, then perhaps Tyson's greatest victory didn't come in a ring at all. It came the moment he stopped running from himself and chose to face the pain he had been carrying since childhood. So after all the fear, the fame, the violence, and the collapse, what kind of legacy does a man leave when he finally learns how to tell the truth about himself? Today, Mike Tyson no longer lives like a man at war. The chaos that once defined him has slowed into something quieter, heavier, and more reflective. He speaks differently now. Not with intimidation, not with bravado, but with an unusual softness for someone who once built a career on fear. The anger is still there, but it no longer drives the wheel. Tyson often describes his current life as smaller, simpler, and more honest. Gone are the entourages, the excess, the constant need to dominate. He talks openly about mental health, trauma, addiction, and ego, not as concepts, but as lived experiences that nearly destroyed him. For many, hearing these words from a former heavyweight champion is jarring. For others, it's exactly what makes them powerful. He acknowledges that fame did not save him. It delayed his healing. It rewarded his worst impulses and punished vulnerability. Tyson admits that if he had never become famous so young, he might have learned how to regulate emotion before power magnified his wounds. This level of self-awareness doesn't erase his past, but it reframes it. In recent years, Tyson has become something unexpected, a cautionary voice. He speaks to younger athletes about discipline beyond training, about identity beyond success. He warns them that talent without emotional maturity is dangerous. That money cannot replace structure. That being feared is not the same as being respected. These are lessons he learned too late, but lessons he insists others don't have to repeat. His legacy, then, is complicated. In boxing history, he will always be remembered as one of the most dominant fighters ever, explosive, terrifying, unforgettable. His knockouts are still studied. His style is still copied. His name still commands attention. But that legacy alone is incomplete. The deeper legacy of Mike Tyson lives outside the ring. It lives in the conversations he started about trauma in men, especially men raised to believe violence is strength. It lives in his honesty about ego, shame, and accountability. It lives in the uncomfortable truth that success does not heal what pain created, and that without self-awareness, it can make everything worse. Tyson doesn't ask to be admired anymore. He asks to be understood. He doesn't deny his mistakes. He owns them. He doesn't glorify his rise or excuse his fall. He speaks as someone who has seen both extremes and survived neither without scars. In a culture that celebrates winning at all costs, Mike Tyson stands as proof that the cost is real. That unchecked power amplifies unresolved trauma. That fear, when used as fuel, eventually burns the person carrying it. And that redemption, when it comes, is rarely loud. It arrives quietly, through accountability, restraint, and truth. The world once knew Mike Tyson as the most dangerous man alive. Today, he is something far more rare, a man willing to confront who he was, accept who he is, and speak honestly about the damage in between. And that may be the most meaningful impact he will ever have. So when the applause fades, the belts rust, and the fear disappears, what remains is not the champion, but the human being behind the legend. Mike Tyson's life was never just about boxing. It was about what happens when a wounded child is given power before he is given healing. The world saw knockouts, belts, and fear. What it didn't see was the cost of never learning how to feel safe, how to be vulnerable, how to slow down and face pain without turning it into violence. Tyson's rise proved that talent and rage can take you to the top. His fall proved that without self-awareness, they can take everything away just as fast. There is no clean redemption arc here. No perfect ending. Only a hard truth. Success does not erase trauma. Money does not replace discipline. Fame does not teach you who you are. If anything, it amplifies whatever is unresolved inside you. Tyson learned that too late to protect his legacy, but not too late to reclaim his humanity. Today, his story stands as a warning and a lesson. Strength without emotional control is fragile. Fear ignored becomes destructive. And healing does not begin when you win, but when you stop running from the parts of yourself you don't want to face. Mike Tyson was once the most feared man in the world. But his greatest victory came the moment he chose honesty over ego, accountability over excuses, and self-awareness over denial. And if his story teaches us anything, it's this. The fight that defines your life is rarely the one everyone can see. So what's your story?